Hello, I'm Mia Cutler. Welcome. Today we're talking about wrist pain, which is a very common complaint in yoga. Students complaining of wrist pain. There's a lot of attention paid to the wrists in yoga. So we're going to look at some reasons why you might be having wrist pain, some ways to alleviate the pain, to strengthen the muscles that support this joint, to increase the range of motion in the wrist, and just an overall awareness of what's going on in the wrists. So thanks for coming today. Wrist pain in yoga is really common. And I don't know why you have wrist pain, but I can show you a couple things to do to alleviate wrist pain if it's caused from lack of mobility and lack of strength. So first we have to strengthen the muscles that support the wrist, the forearm, the muscles in your hand and wrists. Well, there's an actual muscle in the wrist. It's in the hands and the forearms. The wrist is a joint, right? So the muscles that support that joint. So we need to increase mobility, the range of motion that you own in the wrist joint. And we need to support that by strengthening the muscles in your hands and your forearms. When you look at the mobility of your wrist, when you think of being in table pose, and so those of you that know me, my arms don't straighten. I've had rheumatoid arthritis for 35 years, and my arms don't straighten. But imagine my arm is straight. When you hold your arm out straight and you extend your wrist, this is called wrist extension, is it 90 degrees? Mine isn't. Even if my arm was straight, it would not be 90 degrees. But when you're in table pose or plank pose, there is a 90-degree angle here. If you don't own that, then anytime you go into that, you're putting pressure on your wrist joint. So we need to increase the mobility of your wrist to own this shape at 90 degrees. Now, if I take my hand, I can force my wrist to 90 degrees. This is called passive motion. What am I able to do to my wrist? Passive motion. Active motion is, do I own that space? I don't own that space. But I have other stuff going on, so I don't even really worry about my wrist. But for you, this is something we want to work on. So this is wrist extension. The opposite of this is flexion. The ability of your wrist to flex without curling your hands under. That's compensation. So keeping your hands straight, extension, flexion. And then we have side to side, the ability of your wrist to move side to side. So let's just isolate. These are called controlled articular rotations. So they're wrist cars. First we want to isolate the forearm so that we're not moving the forearm. Keeping your palm flat. You'll just sort of see, you're not going to go very far. There's not a lot of movement laterally. So we just go back and forth and see, what do you own without moving your hand, your fingers. And then let's do flexion and extension. Flexion and extension. First of all, just notice that's hard to do, keeping your hand still while you move the wrist joint. And then we'll do circles. I'm shaking. Not because I'm scared, because it's challenging. You know, when we focus on something, we put our attention on it, and we're giving it all we got. Big circles. Good. That's just information, and it's good to do these every day, warming up the wrists, especially before yoga class. And now squeeze and open. Let's do this a bunch. Wiggle your fingers. All right, other side. So isolate your wrist. And see, I have some swelling here between my pinky fingers, so it doesn't go towards my other fingers. But extension, flexion, without the hand curving in. Flexion, extension, flex, extend, and then left and right. Kind of interesting. Big circles. I should do this more often. So little time. So many things we should do every day. All right, and then let's squeeze. Let's do both. Now roll your wrists. Extend as a fist. Flexion, extension. Okay. Something that feels good is to twist the skin and the muscles in the forearm. And switch direction. Oh, that feels good. Do the other one. All right, so that is just an awareness of the ability of your wrist to flex, extend, and then move laterally in circles, right? Slowing down enough to notice. So let's talk about your hands in yoga. In yoga, we move from the ground up. So anything on the ground is foundation. And if you're in my class, I can tell in about 10 or 15 seconds a lot about your practice just by looking at your hands. So traditionally, when you're a newbie, when you're a beginner yogi, your hand, I'm just going to show you here. When you're beginning a yoga practice, traditionally the hands will probably be a little bit closed, the fingers will be closed, and then the weight will go on the outer part of the hand. So what we want is an awareness of this spot. This is like the magic spot in yoga. It's like the secret spot. And this spot will give you length and strength in your practice. Length. If we were to draw circles on pressure points, the biggest circle would be here, that's pressing into the ground. And the next two would be here, not here. So have an awareness of where the weight is in your hands. And as you come to your mat over and over again, you will increase your awareness of what's going on with your hands. So one of the cues I give in class always, without looking at your hands, feel them and notice what they're doing, because they're active participants. So when we look at the hands in yoga, we want to spread the fingers wide. And very often the space between the thumb and the first finger is a bit more narrow. The weight distribution in between the thumb and first finger, that is where we want most of the weight. Then on the knuckles, increasing out towards the pinky finger. And so there's not a lot of weight in the heel of the hands. It doesn't mean the heel is lifted. It's just that there's an awareness. It's almost like a suction cup, or the middle of the hand, there's a slight feeling of lifting. And as we extend out, your finger pads become your brakes. Especially if you're doing handstands, crow, any arm balances. So let's look at your hands. Put them down and spread your fingers wide. Maybe take that thumb in just a smidge. And notice, does the weight go out? So we want the weight on the inner part. Oh, there's two bones in your forearm. The ulna, which is running on the pinky finger side, and the radius. And the ulna isn't as weight-bearing as the radius is. So if you put more weight on the outside, the ulna, this bone, is getting a lot more attention. We want to put the weight on the inside. And as we move up the arm, over time, the elbow crease begins to roll a bit forward, externally rotating. You can have a little bend in your elbows. So not here with the wrists, all the weight going on the outer part, but we want to put the hands down, roll gently the crease of the elbows forward, and keep firming that space between the thumb and first finger. And then we try to maintain that through the whole practice. It's hard. But it is through this spot, that secret spot, that we can push the earth away, finding length and strength instead of collapsing on the outside of the hand. So hand placement is really important. Okay, let's come to table pose. Bring your hands under your shoulders, and then find that foundation. We're just going to do some circles, little circles. And as you do the circles, feel your whole hand anchored down. Bailey, go on. Lovey, go away. And then take your fingers so they're facing out. And the same thing here. You could rock left and right. You could make circles on your wrists. But there's an awareness and an attention to keeping the fingers flat. And then what if we were to turn the fingers to face the knees? We feel a nice stretch on the forearms. The closer that your hands are to your knees, the more accessible this will be. The further away that your hands are, there's an increased load on the wrist. So you'll decide how much is enough. Nice, sweetie. All right. And then let's turn the palms up. Oof, this is very often quite painful. So see if you could straighten your arms. See if you could get your thumb, your pinky finger, and all your fingers flat. And again, the closer your hands are to your knees, it's more accessible. The further away, it's an increased load. And then come to sit on your heels, or if you need to put a block between your heels or two blocks, and we'll just shake out the hands a bit. Let's take your arms straight. You're going to push your palms away from you without leaning forward. Keep pushing the palms, spread your fingers wide. We're mimicking being in plank pose and table pose. And then turn your palms down, pushing the heels away from you. Spread your fingers wide. Keep lifting your heart. And then turn your palms up and release. Shake it out. That's hard work. All right, so wrist push-ups or heel, I don't know what they're called, heel push-ups, heel of the wrist push-ups. These take a little bit of time to sort of figure out. So come to table pose. These are for strengthening the muscles in your forearms. Try to keep your arms straight. You're going to lift the heel of your hand up and lower. Up and lower. 8 of these. Up, lower. And focus on what are your fingers doing. Try to keep your arms straight. I lost count, but that's okay. Let's do 2 more. Up and up. Good. Come back to sit on your heels. Spread your fingers, wiggle your fingers. Shake out your wrists. So those are a couple of things to increase mobility. First, an awareness, right? What are your wrists doing? Increase mobility in the wrist. And a little bit of strength. Every time you come into plank pose, every time you come into downward dog, you're working the muscles in your forearms and your fingers by keeping an awareness of grounding to the earth. But what if your wrists are sore and you don't want to be in plank pose or table pose with your hands flat? Well, there's some things you could do. So let's look at that angle, right? Remember, my arms don't straighten. From the shoulder to the wrist. Shoulders are above the wrists in table pose. If this angle is too much for you, take your hands a bit forward to lessen the angle so it's not so much a 90-degree angle. The second one to be maybe having fists. You could do fists on the ground. And sometimes this is much better for people who have wrist issues. Okay, you know what? You're sweet. So fists. Another option would be to come to your forearms so that you're on table, in table with your forearms. Go away. Bailey. Okay. Or that you put blocks down under your forearms. And that just elevates everything up so that you are mimicking as though your arms are straight. And you can do cat-cow here, all sorts of things you could do with your hands lifted and you're on your forearms. If my elbows are bothering me, that's what I do. I don't really have wrist issues because it's more for me, my elbows, but it's the same thing. So we're going to get into downward dog. We're going to look at the hands in downward dog. And then I'm going to show you, if your wrists are sore, that you can do downward dog as dolphin. And I'll show you how to get to the front of the mat if you're not in downward dog. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's come to downward dog. Yeah, you have to go bye-bye. Go over there. There you go. So look at your fingers, right? Spread them wide. Feel where the weight is. It's in between the thumb and first finger. Tuck your toes under. Bailey. Tuck your toes under. Send your hips up and back. Bend your knees. Look at your hands and try to keep that awareness in your hands. Think of the secret spot, right? In between the thumb and first finger. Let your head hang down. And as you find that secret spot, push it into the ground to find some more length. Maybe start to wrap the crease of your elbows towards each other. And take a breath or two here. Your heels can be as high as you want. And then we'll come down to the ground. Shake out your wrists. So you can also do downward dog on blocks. Sometimes it feels a little bit slippery. So it just depends on your mat and it depends on your blocks as to whether this will feel safe for you. If it doesn't feel that safe, you can always put your blocks against the wall and do downward dog against the wall with your hands on blocks. So put the hands on the blocks. You could wrap the heel of the hand there. Spread your fingers wide and see how that feels. That might feel pretty good. Lots of options here. And then the last option is what I do a lot. I do everything on my forearms. And you'll see me go from my forearms to downward dog and then what it looks like when I step forward. Okay, so I come to my forearms. And when I come to my forearms, they look like the number 11. Tuck my toes, downward dog, up and back. So this is my downward dog. Sometimes I'll go to my hands if I'm feeling really strong. And then to come forward, you know how we lift the heels, bend the knees, look forward, and then you step your feet? So for here, you would just bring your knees down, step a foot forward, another foot forward, find length, forward fold, and rise up. Then we come all the way back down. Look forward, lengthen, plant your hands. This is how I get to where I'm going. I lower my knees, come to my forearms, find plank. For me, this is my, do forearm plank. Lower my hips. Maybe I'm doing Sphinx pose. Maybe I'm doing cobra. And to get to downward dog, my version, which is dolphin, if you have sore wrists, tuck your toes and walk your feet in for dolphin. And this is your downward dog. And then to come forward again, lower your knees. I like to alternate my feet. Lengthen and fold in. All right, I hope that was helpful. I don't know why you have wrist pain, but I hope that by increasing awareness of your hands and increasing mobility of the wrist joint, and by strengthening the muscles that support the wrist joint, you're able to alleviate some of that pain. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to me.